Hey everybody, and then today we're going to learn how to paint the Deathwatch for the Space Marines chapter. The Deathwatch is basically a Space Marine chapter that specializes in hunting Xenos factions, such as Orcs, Necrons, Eldar, Tau, Genestealer cults, and Tyranids. So, without further ado, we're going to get to the painting tutorial. As you notice, I got 5 Assault Intercessors, and they're all pretty much painted. The black armor is done, as well as the skin, So, and since Deathwatch are from all 8 of the 9 of the first founding chapters, so if you notice, his right shoulder pad is already painted because he comes from the Blood Angels chapter. And so today we're going to focus on painting the arm and the left arm and the shoulder pad. Here I have some lead belcher just from my brush right here, which I took out of the pot off camera. So for this, let's get started. Always when you're painting, always grab a paint palette. This is my paint palette. Sorry if it's a little messy. So you're going to put a little bit. You can grab a little more paint. You grab a little bit of your paint and you put on your palette, just a little bit. And since this is a metallic paint, use very, very little water. Very, very little. All right, there you go. Nice amount of water on my brush. Then I'm mixing it into the paint just to thin it down slightly. Right consistency. Perfect. Always twist the brush so you have a little bit of a point on it. Okay. Here, we're going to take this one that's almost done. So for this, we're just going to paint the right arm and the right shoulder pad. See, we're going to start by base coating with lead belcher. If you don't have lead belcher, you can of course use Iron Warriors or Iron Hand Steel. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that your metal comes out nice and bright for the bluish shade that we're going to add. And if you may notice, it may be a little strokey at first, but it may take 2 thin coats. Just be patient, and it will become equivalent right in a second. Take a little more, sand it down. Okay. And if you have too little paint, just make sure to grab a little more. Not too much, just a little more. And one little lore fact that people don't know much about Deathwatch is that the Deathwatch are the only Space Marine chapter that are authorized to use Xenos weapons. They can use Necron weapons, Orc weapons, and stuff like that. If any other Space Marines use them, they just get killed by the Imperium automatically. Take a little bit excess. Sorry about that. I had to get the thing all shown. Shoulder pad. Now, and also one last thing. Just a disclaimer, I do not own any of these contents whatsoever. I just wanted to show up this painting tutorial because I've been wanting to do it for such a long time. Okay. If you look now, our first base coat is done. Just make sure... If you think you're done, just make sure you go over the miniature and just check again to make sure that there's no blobs anywhere, and just make sure that there's no strokes or bits that you left unpainted. Just go back and check. And there we are. That's the arm base coated. All right, so just make sure whenever you're done using one paint, just make sure you use your paintbrush just to clean it out a little bit. And if you're cleaning out your metallic paints, make sure after a few cleans with metallic paint, make sure to empty your water pot, or else you'll get sparkles in your regular paint, which you don't want. I'm just using a paper towel to dry off my brush. Okay. So now, basically, if you look at the red shoulder pad right here, it's not very thin, not very thick, not very even base coat. So for here, since he's from the Blood Angels, we're going to naturally use Mephiston Red. So, make sure to shake up your paints just to make sure it's still good. Okay, Mephiston Red. All right. For this, I'm going to take some Mephiston Red and put it on my palette right here. Okay, so just grab a smidge of water You'll need just a little bit, even because it's a base coat paint. Base coat paints are pretty thick. Mix it up. Okay, perfect. So for here, we're going to take our Deathwatch intercessor. And here, we're just going to finish the shoulder pad because it's not really a solid red yet. All right. So, oh, and also just make sure to get the edges, just such as the shoulder pad trim on the outside as well. Okay. Put it down for a second. Cleaning off my brush again. And just another painter tip, always remember to close your pots or else your paint will dry out. Okay, so for this intercessor, basically, the base coats are done. So you have to leave just a couple of seconds for this because it dries pretty quickly. Okay, I just checked the silver is done, so we're gonna do some shading on it. Now the Deathwatch armor has more of a bluish tone, kind of like a bluish gray, stuff like that. So instead of using Drakenhof Nightshade, we're going to do something a little weird. We're going to use a technical paint, which is a glow paint called Nighthawk Gloom. Nighthawk Gloom is a technical paint, so it's mostly used for ghostly blue effects. Make sure to shake it up. Okay. So Nighthawk Gloom, and since it's a glow paint, you're going to want to thin it down a little bit so it doesn't glow on the miniature. Okay, get your palette out. You take some Nighthawk Gloom and put on your palette. You may be thinking, why use Nighthawk Gloom? Well, from my personal experience, I tried Drakenhof Nightshade and it overpowers the color a little bit. So we're going to thin down the Nighthawk Gloom a little bit. Just cleaning off my brush here, just a second. Okay. For this, since it's more of a wash paint, we're going to naturally use Lamium Medium. For those of you that don't know, Lamium Medium is basically a shade without pigment in it. So it's basically so it can thin down the shade without changing the properties of the paint whatsoever. It's mostly a clear paint. It's a technical paint. So make sure to shake it up as well. Okay, open the pot. So, basically, what we're going to do, we're going to take some Lamium Medium out of the pot. We're going to take about 1, 2 brushfuls, and then mix it in with our Nighthawk Gloom. And if you notice, our Nighthawk Gloom is slightly thinned. See how transparent it is. Always twist your brush. Okay, so, onto the miniature. For here, basically, we're going to shade the metal part on his arm, not on the bolt weapons, So here, we're going to start on the shoulder pad first. So for here, we're just going to shade it a little bit using the Nighthawk Gloom. All right, there we go. That's our arm shaded. Okay, so next we're going to be shading the red armor, the red shoulder pad. So you're gonna have to grab a very fine brush for this because we're going to do something called recess shading. You can grab, but if you're using Citadel, you could of course use your small or extra small layer brush. But for this, I'm just using a fine detail miniature brush. So for this, we're going to naturally take a wash that will be cohesive with the red. So we're going to use Carroburg Crimson. Keep in mind this is the old Carroburg Crimson, and they had newer formulations out recently. Shake it up. we're going to just take some Carroburg Crimson, get a little bit, and just put some on the palette. You could apply this straight from the pot, but we're not thinning it down. We just need to control how much is on our brush. A little more. Very good. So, if you look at the shoulder pad, there's a little recess. There's a little recess right in between the shoulder trim. So we're going to paint that. So you have to be extremely careful. And if you kind of have a shaky hand, just kind of hold your breath or something like that. So, just into the recess. And if you notice, it's recessing right there. Grab a little more from the palette. Now, if you go too far, don't worry, you can just neaten it up and tidy it up later. All right, that's a shoulder pad shaded. So, basically, what we're going to do next is we're going to tidy up some of our highlights. So basically, we're going to tidy up some stuff that may not have gotten in, or maybe they just gotten too bright. So, naturally, for the red shoulder pad, I'm going to use a even lighter shade, a layer paint, Evil Sun Scarlet. Shake your paint. Now, Evil Sun Scarlet is a layer paint, meaning it's more transparent than base paint, so you don't have to thin it down too much, but you want to thin it down just enough to where it flows nice and smooth. Get a little bit on the brush, a little bit of water. And if you have a little too much water, that's fine. Just go in and grab a little more paint. There we go. So, basically, for the shoulder pad, we're going to we're going to highlight the trim. Oh, make sure to get rid of some excess so you don't overload your brush. So for here, all we're going to do is this. Go around the edges. Or if you want a more retro look, you could highlight the things for the time being. Okay, so if there's a slight difference. This is the base coat, and this is the red. You can't really see it, but let me turn on my light. There we go. So if you look, there's a difference. This is the darker base coat, and this is the shade, and this is the highlight on the trim right here. Just make sure I clean off my brush. Okay, so that's the red highlighted for the time being. So, if you notice, the shade has darkened down our red too much, so basically we're going to go back with reapply another base coat of Mephiston Red. So for here, take a little bit of paint, thin it down slightly. Very good. And since this is we turned it into a layer, so basically we're going to look for a nice even layer. More paint. All right, and as you can see, we have a nice base coat in the middle of the thing. So, that's pretty much it for that. Now, we're going to start with the silver, highlighting the silver since it's dry. For this, we're going to take a layer metallic known as Iron Breaker. Iron Breaker is basically is a silver paint, but it's a layer paint, so it's more translucent just like all layer paints. Even though it's metallic, we do want to thin it down slightly, but not too much. Take some Ryan Breaker, put it on the palette. Very, very little water when you're using a metallic paint. Perfect. All right, so all we're going to do is we're going to highlight some of the edges, but of course, I'm going to basically just highlight the other bits of metal. So exposed parts such as the trim and the inside of the shoulder pad, but we'll discuss that in just a second. And then we're going to highlight the shoulder pad. If you look, we're not going to put it all over. We're just going to leave the recesses, such as the trim of the pad right here. Basically, just paint around that recess. All right, with the highlight done, that's our shoulder pads done. So, if you want to make sure, like, if you want to check to see if there's any other painting tutorials, you can go look on other channels. I highly recommend, in terms of 40K or just if you're into miniatures in general, I highly recommend looking at Sarastro Painting, Pete the Wargamer, and Warhammer TV. It says Warhammer, but just type in Warhammer TV, it'll make it a lot better. They have a lot more painting tutorials on miniatures in general. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and see you later.